Hello, my name is Bailee Conrad, and this is my humanities research project titled Deaf Poetry Presents Spoken Word Poetry as Protest Art, an analysis of the evolution of spoken word poetry and how it can be used as a form of protest art. From YouTube videos to national slam poetry competitions, spoken word poetry is slowly taking over the poetry scene. But what makes spoken word poetry such a popular medium for creative expression? After seeing countless spoken word videos pop up on my social media feed covering topics from mental health to social justice, I wondered the same thing, which brought me to my research question. When did spoken word poetry first become popularized, and what elements present in the art form have made it a prime medium for protest artists? In order to explore this topic, I will first offer some context about spoken word poetry by defining a few key terms, then discussing key elements present in spoken word performances that I will later discuss in my analysis, and then I will give a brief history of the art form. Then, for my analysis, I will look at a performance by Imani Cezanne from the 2015 National Poetry Slam titled Protest. Finally, I will conclude with the implications of this research. Let's get started by going over some context. To start, a few couple key terms. First, what is spoken word poetry? In her article, Writing to be Heard, Spoken Word Poetry with Special Reference to Two Poets of Gujarat, researcher Rupali Burt gives a definition of performance or spoken word poetry by differentiating between it and written poetry, that is simply read out loud. Burke argues that the language used in spoken word makes it more accessible than formal written poetry. And more often than not, spoken word artists go on a stage and perform their piece from memory. This allows them to engage and connect with their audience. This connection helps when artists choose to cover topics such as social justice issues, as it can encourage the audience to get involved with the topic. The next key term is protest art. Michael Bird defines protest art as avowedly activist and seeking to achieve a tangible political impact by mobilizing opinion against a powerful adversary. As I've mentioned, spoken word artists often discuss social justice issues, such as racial inequality, in their pieces. Oftentimes, these performances function as protest art because they seek to mobilize their audience against their oppressors. Now that I've provided these definitions for you, I want to talk about the elements present in spoken word poetry that make it an effective medium for protest artists. First, speech tempo. In her thesis titled The Intonational Phonology of Spoken Word Poetry, Abigail Crum notes that some artists use speech rate to articulate the importance of a particular line. When performing a piece, artists may increase or decrease the tempo of their speech, emphasizing the part of the piece that has a dramatic change. Additionally, spoken word artists will utilize pauses within their performances to emphasize certain words or lines, but also to allow their audience to absorb what they've just said. And finally, we have voice volume. Just like with tempo, artists will increase or decrease the volume of their voice for emphasis. When an artist dramatically changes from a quiet voice to a loud one, and vice versa, it helps the audience to understand the importance of a particular line. Now that you understand the key terms and elements related to spoken word poetry, I want to provide you with a brief background of the modern history of spoken word. Though the exact origins of the art form remain unknown, two events led to its mainstream popularity: the creation of the New Yorker Poets Cafe and Russell Simmons Presents Def Jam Poetry. In the 1970s, Miguel Algarín, pictured on the right, noticed that his friends needed a place to practice their poetry out loud. So he began inviting them to his home on the Lower East Side of New York City. The popularity of his idea quickly spread in the 1990s after decades of money struggles and location issues. He and his now much larger group of friends opened the first New Yorker Poets Cafe on East 3rd Street. Russell Simmons, an established businessman with a successful record label, was inspired by the New Yorker Poets Cafe, and in 2002 he created the series Russell Simmons Presents Def Poetry Jam, which aired on HBO until 2007. Spoken word poetry's roots in Latinx and Black communities has made it a popular medium for those who wish to protest against racial inequalities present in their communities and share them with the world. Now, moving on to my analysis. One such artist chose to use her craft for just that. In her piece, Protest, Imani Suzanne used the previously discussed elements of speech tempo, pauses, and voice volume to paint a picture for her audience about how she calls her brother as a form of protest. This analysis will discuss the effectiveness of each of these elements in conveying her message to her audience. Because artists often use more than one of these elements at once, I will try to isolate each specific element the best I can to analyze each of their individual effects and successes. The first element I want to look at is speech tempo. In this clip, you will notice that Suzanne speaks rather quickly. I would like it to note that prior to this clip, her tempo was at a normal speaking pace.
Yesterday, I was an activist. Yesterday, I was a radical. Yesterday, I was ready to set this country on fire. Option blocked by option block.
This uptick conveys to her audience the emotions she experienced during this period. In sharing these intense feelings so loudly, it creates a connection with her audience that can encourage them to act in a similar manner, potentially becoming activists and radicals themselves. Moving on to Suzanne's use of pauses. Toward the end of her performance, Suzanne pauses several times during one line, as you will see in this clip.
In danger, but I know for a fact that they might kill my brother. Just because he's black.
Come on.
Because he's still alive.
As you noticed, Suzanne punctuated these lines with several pauses, allowing her audience to soak up the gravity of the everyday reality she and her brother face just because they are Black. Her voice even cracks with emotion, further conveying her emotions to her audience. And lastly, let's take a look at how Suzanne uses a change in volume to convey her ideas to her audience. In this clip, you will notice an increase in Suzanne's voice as she says the next line.
Watching no one come for your child's body. How civil a disobedience do you expect when black boys are buried and then put on trial?
The increase in volume helps to put emphasis on the phrase and helps the audience to understand that this is a central idea in her poem. All of these elements that I've discussed help Suzanne assert the main theme of her poem, that simply being alive as a Black person in and of itself is a form of protest. Now that I've discussed my analysis, what does all of this mean? For me, for you, what now? Well, first off, we can listen. People of color have chosen a vocal art form so that they may literally be heard. We must listen to them when they share their struggles with us, and then take action when we can. And lastly, we must spread the word. Taking physical action can be hard, especially in these unprecedented times of quarantine, self-isolation, and social distancing. But we can all spread the word by sharing a video or a post or making my own to help make sure people are aware of the racial inequalities present in our society. And maybe, just maybe, someone will be moved and these issues won't exist anymore. Thank you.